Oh, there we go. That means if I press that button, we're live. We're live in front of an audience of hundreds. No, not quite yet. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Rail Natter. Tonight is going to be not a subdued one, but thankfully Bonnie is here. Hi, Bonnie.
Hello.
Thankfully, Bonnie is here to keep me right because I'm recovering from what was quite a nasty fever and goodness knows what other ailments tied in with it. So I have no idea what's going on. My brain is fried. My body temperature is not capable of regulating itself, and I have a lot of water to hopefully keep me alive. So this could be an interesting one. But it'll be fine because all of you are going to keep me right. Bonnie's going to keep me right, and it's a news episode, so I don't have to create any particularly structured arguments. I just have to say things, and we can chat about them. It's going to be a nice chatty episode. Hello, Gareth. Yeah, happy St. Doinians. I can't Doin Wednesday. Dwin Wednesday. It's Dwin Wednesday. Sorry. See, brain fried. It's doing really well. Right, anyway, before I whiffle on, yeah, Scotland has Burners Night, Wales has Carpet Burners Night. Randy, yes, good. Fantastic, thanks, Gareth. Right, anyway, enough of this. So, as is traditional, it's episode 150. It's the 150, well, actually, technically it's the 151st episode if we count episode 0, but it is episode 150, which is quite exciting. We've done 150 of these bloody things, which is remarkable. Crikey. And things are going just great, which is what this episode is going to be. Oh, there's a nice critical beep noise. Why's go? Oh. PowerPoint's not very happy. Bear with me a sec, everyone. In fact, I'm going to go both of our faces briefly, just to occupy the screen while I work out why PowerPoint is broken. Look, it's me and Bonnie. Look, isn't that great? Hooray! We're holding the holding screen while I make that work. And then go to yeah, there we are. Everything's working fine. Look, it's us, and then it's not going to be us again because I've got it working. I think now. There we go. Right, good. It's a class 150. Because it's episode 150, so it's class 150. Lots of things are interesting in this picture. One of them is this is Preston Station. It's Preston, as you can see. There's Preston. Also, this shocking mess of a double arrow. That's not a double arrow. It's very, very, very much too much thin. That'll become relevant later in the episode, folks. But also, it's got the funny Sprinter logo with the weird Sprinter that they had. But it's a 150. It's the first of the Sprinters. This harks back, kind of in a nice way, right back to like one of the earliest episodes we did on Class 158, which I think was like episode 3 or something like that. It was early days. Anyway, so enough of that waffle. I don't really have much else to say about the 150 other than it's still running in a few places. Golly. Yeah, right, anyway, enough of this waffle because we're going to talk about the news in just moments. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. The Intercity 225 fading away. Bonnie, what you missed there was my usual news gag, which is where it starts with the engine theme tune, but then partway through a rather ill-balanced and very loud version of the Channel 4 news theme tune kicks in to just scare the willies out of everyone. Anyway, before we talk about the news and talk about the fact the railways are still in chaos mode, let's get Bonnie back. Bonnie, hello.
Hello.
It sounds like you've also been ill this week, so we're both in a bad way.
All over the country is suffering with winter RSV flu virus thing.
It's not nice. It's doing the rounds, and it's frying everyone's brains. While the two of us are still basically compos mentis, Bonnie, you're a returning champion, Bonnie Price. Bonnie, do you want to reintroduce yourself to the good folks listening and watching, just in case they've jumped in and have managed to miss episodes that you've been in?
No worries. Thank you. So my name's Bonnie Price. I am the current national vice chair for the charity Young Rail Professionals. We're a not-for-profit charity that supports young people, getting them into railway, inspiring people who are already in railway, giving them opportunities, things like that. Generally, we're just a bunch of enthusiasts for all things rail. However, please don't ask me about trains, because I actually don't know anything about trains. I'm all about train stations, which is probably even nerdier.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the good detailed stuff. We like people. Well, people often say, "Yeah, you're a train nerd." I was like, "No, I'm a railway nerd actually." I might well have some knowledge of trains, but my knowledge of railways is far greater. So, yeah, Bonnie, it's a pleasure to have you along for this one. I mean, it's an unusual. It's a rail natter first in the sense that you're not presenting a thesis of your own tonight. You're simply joining me to just have a chat, do some general chat over the news, which is quite nice.
That's what we're in. We're here to have a rail natter.
We are here to have a rail natter, precisely. Yeah, for those of you enjoying it when the people watching the show say the name of the show, doing the show say the name of the show, then we've done that. If you have a question, by the way, folks, feel free to @ my name, and then it shows up brightly in red in the YouTube chat. Hello, everyone in the chat, and then we can answer your questions. However, we shall press on by making our faces small and miniaturized, and then having a look at the news slides. So we start with a very broad topic, which I've summarised by using Train Beacon's sort of nice Twitter outputs, where they show kind of how much Transpennine Express and Northern have been letting the side down in terms of reliability of service. Cross country, not great either, and then Avanti, not great, relatively speaking. But this is the railways are still in very much in calamity mode, and I thought, yeah, Bonnie, before to kick off. Have you been caught up in the mess at all? Have you managed to avoid getting snarled up too much in the railway mess?
I mean, in life, generally, no, because it's where I work. But
yeah, quite.
But no, I think in terms of journeys and things like that, I've been fairly lucky in terms of, around the various strike action and things like that. But I think generally with, the modes of transport changing for a lot of people who are now working from home, I don't think it's a reasonable expectation to expect things to return to pre-pandemic midweek, because there is no longer, for many, many, many different industries, a standard commute anymore. And I think we need to be focusing more on leisure travel in terms of getting people using trains for their leisure travel, for their holidays across the country and things like that, rather than getting them on cars again. Don't want that.
Yeah, I suppose one of the challenges with that is that's true, that shift in travel patterns is true in and around the southeast and around London, but actually across the north of England at the moment, commuting is essentially back to where it was pre-pandemic on the railways. So there's this mixture, and so whilst we have these changing patterns, actually it's more of an acceleration of pre-COVID sort of trends, like that reduction in. As you say, that reduction in the traditional commute, the season ticket commute, particularly into the city, into London, that's certainly ebbed away. But actually, outside the M25, the less traditional commuting numbers are actually surging quite substantially. So it is a complicated picture, and I suppose there's a risk if we over focus on leisure that we end up making rail services kind of not quite satisfy the requirements of everyone. So there's an interesting debate. The key challenge, though, I think, is that we have to look at the data. We have to look at the travel data and understand what the needs of people wanting to travel are, and that will come up in the news shortly. Everyone, in that not having the right data to make transport decisions is a thing that this government is enjoying doing, but we'll touch on that later. So yeah, chaos mode. Have we got any strikes booked in the next?
Yes, yeah, we do. So the 1st of February and the 3rd of February at the moment are currently anticipated strike dates that have been released, unless of course there is a deal reached between the RMT and the government. That would be nice.
Yeah.
It would help. It would help if people were actually engaging with unions rather than just going on different chat shows going, we just can't get a deal done. Well, you have to meet each other to get a deal done, first of all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's this. I was on Trash Future a couple of weeks or a week ago, and that we kind of within Trash Future we were capturing the fact that the DFT, after a couple of fairly calamitous appearances in front of the Transport Select Committee, were actually starting to shift their shift their negotiating stance slightly, in that they were freeing up the talks to do more negotiations, which is still slightly moot, but at least it's a step in the right direction, and also have kind of moved the RDG to one side a little bit, which is also a good thing, because the RDG are a waste of time in terms of managing the strikes. That's my opinion. It doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily Bonnie's. Everyone, just saying. Anyway, yes. So yeah, lots of them. Yeah, I was going to say, John Christoph pointing out they're similar to North America. Places with dedicated commute networks are still below 2019 ridership, while places with all-day services have close to as many riders as ever. Yeah, absolutely. So of course, there's lots of other... Oh, go on, Bonnie.
Sorry, in terms of North America, you've just sort of bumped something loose that I thought about in my head earlier in the week, is that all through winter, we have constant disruption. And I find it quite nationally embarrassing, if I'm honest, that considering that our weather patterns are not that extreme compared to the likes of North America, obviously in terms of Canada, I appreciate they don't have as much rail network as we do. However, they still do have significant rail networks that manage to run through winter. And I just find it very embarrassing that every single winter it's, the extreme weather. I'm sorry, it's not extreme, it's just winter. I'm pretty sure there's an element of climate change to our winters that are making them harsher. However, we can't get to every winter and go, sorry guys, there's just no trains between London and Newcastle this weekend because, the weather. It's just not acceptable. And I find it incredible that every winter we have the same discussions within the industry going, there was some snow.
But the thing is, Bonnie, is that we get told off when we, and I'm using scare quotes here, gold plate the network so that it can be resilient against these weather patterns. We get told off when we do that. We have to go for a minimum viable product, which will work under some circumstances, but not all. It's highly frustrating. There's in terms of various people. Yeah, I was worth saying, of course, is that there are loads of other people striking outside of the railways. As Tom is pointing out, teachers, lecturers, civil servants, lots of people out on strike on the 1st, which is good. Hi, Rich Nerd 411, by the way. Welcome. First live stream you've watched came over from Trash Future. Well, welcome. We're both waving. Yes, so it's a good point actually. The winter calamity, but at the moment, most of the chaos is through staff shortages and like rostering that's not quite right, and driver training is still causing headaches. It is very straight. I have not got we've yet to see a straight answer from Transpennine Express as to why their service is so shoddy. It's quite often a 2 hour delay between a 2 hour gap between services, which is
that's just not acceptable. Yeah. That's embarrassing.
It is embarrassing.
I mean, the thing is as well, we have this. We're going to come out of winter. We're going to come out of these driver shortages and rostering issues and everything else. And by the time that all of that sorts itself out, best case scenario, that's by summer. Then we'll get to peak summer and we'll get, it's too hot for the trains to run due to the tracks potentially buckling. So we're just not going to run any trains because it's too hot. I mean, if we keep constantly going for this minimum standard where, we're going to keep building everything to the absolute minimum standard and not future-proof anything, we're going to get to the point where there are less days of the year that trains run than there are when they don't run. And that's just not acceptable. I don't understand how, as an industry, we can keep strategizing that way, that the minimum standard is the acceptable standard that we should be aiming for.
But the Treasury don't want us to spend any money. That's the key thing. And then it's not even that though, because it's entirely, we've institutionalized, and we'll touch. In fact, you know what? That's a perfect segue into what I think is the next slide. Industry has absolutely constitutionalized itself into the idea of, we've got very senior people in the industry cascading out that, government's finances are in a very tricky situation. They've got no money, and therefore we as a railway need to tighten our belt. Just worth saying, the UK government, or the Exchequer, is currently earning more than it ever has in history in tax take. Since the last, sorry, you can tell my brain is slightly fried. Since last year, the tax take has gone up by over 11%. We earned 60 billion more in taxes this year than last year. So we have plenty of money. There is plenty of money to spend if it's so the idea that this and it feeds back exactly into what you're saying, Bonnie, is that we've kind of institutionalized this idea that we need to stop asking for and pushing for and making the case for expanding and improving the railway network, and we just have to make do with them not being given anything. It's very frustrating.
Perhaps people need to shake the magic money tree a bit harder that is government and explain that if you keep spending a penny every day rather than just spending a pound once, you'd save money in the long term, and explain it perhaps a bit more forcefully to people who aren't necessarily within the railway and don't understand how it works, because it isn't obvious. How it works isn't obvious. I think a lot of people in the railway take it for granted that we all get it because we all work in the railway, whereas people outside of the railway don't necessarily understand, okay, we can rip the plaster off now and, you know, spend X million here, or every 50 days we'll be spending 50 grand doing temporary repairs, bus replacement services, and etc. as an example. And I just don't understand how people who are senior within the industry, who have these lines with government and treasury, aren't necessarily taking a harder stance on it collectively.
Yeah, I have to say it frustrates me that the industry's bosses are not more assertive, and part of that is related to the industry structure. If we had an autonomous rail industry structure, you know, if we had basically, if we had a system more like how the railways were pre-Railways Act 93, where you had essentially an autonomous body that basically fought its corner and was quite good at doing it, and was on top of everything, so it could kind of make the case more strategically about, if you spend this money here, it will make all of these savings cascading through industry, rather than just, you know, if you have the track and trains separate, you don't get the benefit of saying, well, if we make all these savings, if we electrify, then the maintenance of the trains and everything is reduced. Well, it's difficult to make that case to Treasury when everything's completely atomized. So yeah, this news article is that government is earning more than ever. Andy Verity, who's a shining light in the BBC, actually, and very good at cutting through a lot of the economic rubbish that gets bounced around by government in terms of, you know, suggesting that we don't have much money. So yeah, very worth giving Andy Verity a follow if you don't already. But yeah, the UK government is earning more than ever. Yes, as others have pointed out, they are burning more than ever on their own bad policy decisions. But yeah, well, there's only so much you can do, right? But it's a bit like when I have discussions with people in Transport Scotland, and they say, "Well, we don't have the money to spend this on that on railways," and I point out that £3 billion is being spent on dualling the A9. So yeah, no, there's plenty of money. It's just not being spent cleverly. And then off the back of that, I'm afraid to say, is the idea that they keep saying it, and then they keep talking about big proposals, and then they keep saying it. The likely next government, which will be very likely be a Labour government, unless something dramatic happens, they've used this phrase that they're not going to open the big government chequebook to repair Britain's faltering public services. No, that's precisely what you have to do. These things don't just get fixed by a magic wand. You don't fix them by magic. You fix them by investing. We have to invest. We've not invested for 20 years.
I despair seeing headlines like this, because I wonder if I sincerely hope it's a ploy to try and steal more Conservative voters, but also think about the amount of Labour voters like myself who are looking at this going, no.
Yeah, just despairing. It's like, I want there to be some hope for the future, and there's so much that needs fixing. The reality, and the other, you put to one side all the fact that you invest and you get returns on all that investment, and you grow the economy, and it pays for itself fairly quickly. Put that to one side. The reality is that there is no other way to fix a lot of these problems. You need to employ more nurses. We need to employ more doctors. We need to employ more staff on the railways. You know, these things cost money. Not to mention the physical investment in the railways, track and trains. Anyway, so that's frustrating. All right, wildly swinging over and jumping over to Poland, in fact, because, and I thought this was an interesting one that someone had sent me and pointed out quite an interesting thing. Here's Lukasz Malinowski here pointing out that intercity fares are rising by nearly 20% on some of the services in Poland, and that's pretty much entirely because of energy costs. And the reason I put this in here is because this is happening across Europe. But it's also happening in the UK, because once again we're seeing a situation where diesel trains are being put in front of formerly electric freight services. Diesel trains are being swapped in for electric trains because the electric rates are going up, and diesel is not, because Network Rail is charging a certain amount for electricity off the back of the electricity costs that it's receiving, which means we're going backwards in terms of decarbonisation of freight. We're having diesel trains, Class 66s hauling things where once it was 90s and 88s. So, yeah, not good. This is happening in lots of countries across Europe, but it's particularly acute in the UK because of our interesting decisions about energy policy. I don't know. Have you been hearing much about? In fact, I know that you and I have a mutual friend who is despairing about certain elements of energy policy on UK railways. But yes, it's
I live on a freight route, and even just yesterday, there was a freight train in the platform outside of my house, and felt a bit like the old man meme of like, get off my lawn. I was like, why is it here? Why has it been stuck here this whole time?
Yeah.
I'm trying to find on WhatsApp groups, like, what the hell is this train doing here, running, not moving for over an hour? It turned out there was a line side fire further up the line. Nobody was hurt. Everybody's fine. But additionally, why are you just leaving a diesel freight train running in a residential area?
Yeah, I always wondered that. Like, there is stop-start technology for locomotives now. Like, they could be doing that.
The answers I get given are always, we have to leave them running in case we turn them off and they don't start again. And I'm just like, oh.
It's not the 1960s. The 66 is a reliable vehicle. Like, come on.
No, but if you think it's that bad, you shouldn't be allowed to take it onto the track.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If I said to a police officer, I can't stop my car because if I stop it, it might not start again.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd be charged with having a dangerous vehicle in public, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand how it's remotely acceptable to have that answer.
Yeah, it's doolally. Yeah, agreed.
I feel like that's what I'm going to keep saying for most of this episode. I don't understand how this is remotely acceptable. Channeling in a Karen.
It's the RailNet away. So, getting into really fun stuff about this, the current government is their whole policy is based around more cars. Their whole transport policy logic is based around more cars, and I believe Luke Murphy here from the IPPR is, I think Luke Murphy. Luke, I'm sorry if you're not from the IPPR. My brain is fried. I believe you're in the IPPR. Anyway, the IPPR have done some analysis of DFT outputs. I believe this analysis is actually from the DFT outputs that Greg Marsden chased for from Leeds ITS. Greg Marsden was chasing government, which is in a news article in a minute as part of this kind of segment. Basically, the projection of government's projection is not that they're going to bother to reduce, is create policy to limit or reduce or kind of otherwise deflect road usage. But thanks, Bonnie. Oh yeah, everyone heard the little Skype message there. That was Bonnie. That's Bonnie sending me pace notes to help me out because my brain is fried. Thanks, Bonnie. Yes. Yes, so Luke does indeed work for the IPPR, so that's fine. You see the beads of fever sweat running down the side of my head, everyone. It's good stuff, isn't it? Anyway.
Who needs heating in a cost of living crisis? Just get a fever.
I know. Well, that's it. It works. It works really well. Yeah. So we have. We've got the kind of, as you can see here. This is kind of their core scenario, which is a growth of what is that? 100. An additional 100 billion vehicle miles. Bonkers. They've got a variety of other. They've got like the technology one, which is to do with autonomous vehicles, we'll get to that in a minute because modelling policy on a thing which will never exist is doolally. We've got their like behavioural change one, which still includes increase in cars, but they have modelled and basically, they have not modelled any possible future where we reduce car usage. They haven't modelled a single one, which is like rather depressing for the Department for Transport to not see a future where we aren't still driving more cars around. It's just really, really worrying and frustrating. Lou Murphy points out here, recent updates to the national road traffic projections show how far the UK has to go in addressing the underlying causes of increasing traffic. Yeah, really depressing. And related to that is the fact that the Road Investment Scrutiny Panel, which I think is a self-titled group of kind of senior professionals and engineers and other academics and folks, are kind of challenging government on its massive road investment strategy program. So, the program for building many more miles of roads to account for this growth in traffic. And the kind of this panel, this group is basically they published a report which maybe we'll do a page turn of it actually. Key questions for road investment and spending, and they pointed out that there are serious problems with the government's current proposals, and that there is a serious gap basically to highlight it's in particular. I'll quote a new civil engineer here. This is Catherine Moore. Hello, Catherine. In particular, it highlights the panel's concern that investment to generate enhanced road capacity for motor traffic and the assumptions on future road use on which this is based may run counter to the course we need to steer to meet our decarbonisation obligations. Absolutely. And related to this, Bonnie, don't worry, I'll deflect in your direction momentarily because these all tie together. Related to this is the fact that government has been blocking access to the underlying data behind its transport decarbonisation plan. It's actually been blocking it. Why, you might wonder? This is Greg Morrison, by the way, Dr. Greg Morrison from Leeds ITS, who has finally managed to break DFT, and they did finally publish a fairly limited version of their analysis underlying the traction. No, not traction. That's the Network Rail report. The Transport Decarbonisation Plan. And within this, I mean, I'm waiting for Greg to do an analysis of this because it'd be good to get Greg on, actually, to talk about it. But in amongst this are a variety of very worrying things. So when you look at the high travel demand, it's the fact that the fact that government is looking at connected autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, as a viable technology. Why are we considering this as a viable technology and making this enormous grand leap of Bonnie? This is maybe you can vent frustration with this with me in a second. Why is government policy accepting the idea of magic fairy dust technology that literally will never, like autonomous vehicles, will never exist in a way that other than lane assist? They just won't exist. And why are they modelling that, and yet they're incapable of modelling a future where we actually electrify the rail network? Like, just this disconnect in sort of modelling magical futures for car policy. Oh,
this feels like the governmental policy equivalent of the character from Wimpy when he's like, "I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today." You can't just keep putting all of your hopes and dreams for decarbonisation onto autonomous vehicles that don't exist.
Yeah, they don't exist. Exactly.
It's not. No, but also, not only does it not exist, electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles are also not the actual entire fix in terms of decarbonisation, because again, you have a lot of problems in terms of the mining for lithium for the batteries that are used for that, which is a horrendous practice in a lot of countries. You know, from a geopolitical perspective, it's pretty disgusting, some of the practices used in many lithium mines across the world. And it's not necessarily, you know, I think when we look back historically, we will look back at electric cars the way people look back at blood diamonds. I know that's quite a strong statement. It's what I think is going to happen. Sort of in 50 years' time, people will be looking back at the industry going, "I can't believe those practices were happening."
It's an absolutely classic example of the rich parts of the world going, if you like, the global north, but it's the rich parts of the world going, "We don't want to change our behaviour, so electric vehicles are going to be the way we don't change our behaviour." How we create the batteries for those is by going to poor countries, often in the global south, but also in other, you know, more closer to home. Serbia is a good example. And we're going to just devour those countries' natural resources, in this case, of lithium. Yeah, exactly. And indeed, you know, perfect segue, because the next slide I've got, kind of continuing this theme, is Daniel Aldana Cohen has done some kind of interesting work. There's a Guardian article that kind of captures the research paper, looking at the impacts of the amount of lithium needed, and we've seen report after report about the fact that in order to satisfy the whole planet's demand for electric vehicles, we don't have enough lithium on the planet, let alone the ability to safely and sustainably mine it. So the idea that we're basing all of our transport policy on that is absolutely mind-blowing.
Embarrassing.
It's not possible. It's just like it's going to be new colonialism. It's just we're going to be going and essentially
it's happening. It's already new colonialism, because there are already lithium mines where people are losing their limbs and not being paid, and are migrant workers who cannot leave the mine that they're working in because their documents have been taken by management / confiscated by management. You know, it's horrendous. It is new colonialism already. And that's why I made the connection to blood diamonds, because I do think we're going to look back in 50 years, 80 years, maybe a bit longer. And there are stark comparisons between both industries. And it's horrific. And it's horrific that more people aren't talking about it, to be honest.
Yeah, and the idea that that's the whole shape of our of transport policies around that, it's needs to change, and the reality is that it's not going to change anytime soon. It's really very frustrating. James Derrick is pointing out lithium is used to refine petroleum, and batteries use lithium ions, so around 1% by weight. So what else are we saying? Gregor is saying a modelling modal change would require assuming government does invest in rail. Well, quite. Bingo combo, wage slavery and new age colonialism. Absolutely. N00, N01. EVs. It's not. Yeah, some people are. James is possibly trying to. James, I'm not sure quite what point you're making, James. But the point is that we need to be. The EV policy and a pro EV policy is one where we keep doing everything the same. This is not being against, or it's not so much being, the future of cars might well be electric vehicles, but whether it's battery or hydrogen, but it is the future of transport cannot be private individual transport because we don't have the resources to do it. So the trouble is this EVs are being used to continue to facilitate and as a business as usual approach to transport policy, and it's not viable. It really is not viable.
I think additionally to that, our transport policies also look in terms of how can we do things like we've always done, but actually as the consumers and people using that transport, we don't need individual cars, nor do we want individual cars to get around everywhere. I appreciate everything in transport that DfT does is often very London-centric, so please excuse me for the little detour to London, but I live in Zone 3 London. There is constantly traffic. Everybody who lives here hates driving, doesn't want to drive, but the bus routes don't run very late. The trains don't necessarily go where they need them to go. Everybody would love to have trams here. Why do not all cities in the UK have trams? There needs to be a multimodal approach to the DfT's policies for the future in terms of actually answering the questions that the populace has to how do we get around over the next 50 years. And that isn't one set of transport. It's a multiple issue.
And often you always get that repose of but I need a car to get to my location. It's like, yeah, sure, fine. If you live if you live out in the sticks and you need a car, fine. Your old Defender, your old petrol or diesel Defender. I don't think there was ever a petrol Defender. Your old diesel Defender is fine. That's the emissions that it's kicking out are trivial. It's the bulk suburban commute and the amount of traffic that travels long distances as well that results in all those emissions. It's not the odd people who live out in the sticks here and there. So no one's coming and taking your cars. We'll kind of touch on that again. As ever with news articles, I try and kind of make this kind of flow a bit. But anyway, the reason this is worrying is not just about the environmental pollution. It's not just about the geopolitics. It's not just about kind of continuing to throw money at an industry that is an awful industry. Lithium mining industry and just mining in general is awful. But entrenched car culture like the fact that people have to rely on cars means that millions of British people are trapped in transport poverty because of the lack of alternatives. This is continue to have this idea that and some klutz that I have muted on Twitter continues to say, your anti-car stance is actually anti-worker and anti-poor people. Mate, it isn't. If you have a look at the demographics of people who own cars, the ones who rely on their car, the ones who the highest car ownership, the ones who rely on car, generally better off people. People who are worse off are the ones who do not have it. They either do not have a car or they struggle to kind of pay for and keep running the car. So anyway, this and car culture is not just about poverty as well. It's the fact that we've got our towns and public spaces are kind of occupied by vehicles. Air pollution in towns is horrible. The stuff that's nicest, like sorry, go on, Bonnie.
I mean, look, I don't think there's a shortage of anyone in between lockdowns of COVID when towns were pedestrianised so that many businesses could open out onto roads. I didn't hear a single complaint of, well, this used to be a road and I liked it better as a road. Everything I heard from everyone, wheelchair users, people with canes, people who are fully ambulant isn't it so nice to be able to walk everywhere safely and, it's not so noisy and smells bad. And that was a constant comparison I had for, the city of Norwich, city of London, city of Manchester, where I was visiting relatives in between lockdowns it's so nice to be able to walk everywhere now. And and I kept trying to explain, it could always be like this.
Yeah, it could be.
Hey, can we just keep it like this? Thanks. I mean, we're looking at America in terms of the fact that vast swathes of America is all built car centric.
Yeah.
and you look at the absolute swathes of parking lots that's just so unnecessary and such a waste, but also it makes people miserable. It is a demonstrable fact that, like Paris building the 15-minute cities around Paris in terms of being able to get everything you need within 15 minutes is a really good idea. And I think personally, we need to move towards that and get rid of the fact that, I want to do a big shop and I live in a city, I'll have to drive half an hour away.
Yeah.
That's
not 100%.
Acceptable.
And it's just deeply Paris Marx, their book about particularly about Silicon Valley and transport, but I'd say that the exploration that they go into about the impacts of and the policy decisions that were made by the auto industry and the impacts of that on society, on all sorts of parts of society are pretty stark. Martha Lauren, hello Martha. Also, let's not forget that predatory car loans are one of the foremost ways for low-income people to end up in debt bondage.
Absolutely.
Let us... James Derrick, it's not a lobbyist talking point to say that EVs are bad. Like, they might be the future for cars, but cars are bad, which means EVs are bad.
But again, the problem is that then you have that blanket statement of cars are bad that then enrages the other side of the argument. We're not saying cars are bad full stop. We're saying the right mode of transport for the right person. That's like saying all drugs are bad. Well, actually, no. Sometimes paracetamol is needed, and sometimes morphine's needed if you've broken your leg. It's about the right transport mode for the right situation, rather than lazily putting this blanket of, we're going to rely on EVs and self-driving cars that don't exist yet because that makes our job easier and we don't need to write a proper policy then. I just find it incredibly irritating that our taxes are paying for these people within the DfT whom, I'll be frank, aren't doing their job. Yeah, but it's not going to be their problem because this is in the future and they don't have to worry about it.
Tim Ballum is saying, have you watched any Not Just Bites? Actually, Tim, I haven't, but I know that shout out to Not Just Bites. They create good stuff. Richard Smith is saying, our cities also just don't have the space for all these cars, which progressively shove their way down any road available and moan when parking restrictions are imposed. Yeah, absolutely. Right, okay.
And constantly very irresponsibly parked, which means people who are using a wheelchair or using a pram have to go in the road and have to take longer routes. And again, other people suffer for somebody else's convenience.
Yeah, the fact that we continue to not have, the fact that we continue to have pavement park, pavement parking is, in theory, is currently illegal, but it's never enforced. No. And as someone who's going to be pushing a buggy around a lot over the next year, I'll be increasingly angry about cars that are parked on pavements, and I might have to redacted with a set of redacted when I pass these cars. Martha Lawrence saying Jason's good. Watch Not Just Bikes. Thanks, Martha. Good recommendation. Right. So, and on the theme of that, we're talking about options and about the fact that people don't have options. Tom Forth, as ever, doing the Lord's work. The Netherlands are about the size of Northern England in terms of kind of population and density and size. So they actually make quite interesting comparisons. So, an entire country compared to North England. And he did a thread fairly recently. Actually, it wasn't fairly recent. It was at the end of December. But it was kind of talking about various transport elements. The fact that Northern England runs many more buses than the Netherlands, but it runs almost no trams. Apart from Manchester, and that's it, and Blackpool. So it's hardly any trams by comparison. But critically, and the one that I suppose is interesting for us as a good overall summary for the fact that suburban transport, in terms of outside of London, suburban transport in the UK is rubbish. So the example he gave is that the Netherlands runs approximately a quarter more trains than Northern England. Those trains are much larger, more likely to be electric. They are on average older, which is an interesting little tidbit. And they actually, from an environmental perspective, that's a good thing. We should be running our trains for longer. That's the whole point of trains, that they last for longer. And they carry approximately twice as many passengers, which is quite interesting. So it's that idea of the fact that we have so many short little 2-car trains bobbing about in certainly north of England on routes that probably should have 6-car trains or more. Always interesting. And as I say, the UK has pretty good, or GB rather, has pretty good intercity rail travel. Our in-city services are pretty good. We have pretty good rural services as well, actually. They might not go everywhere that people want their people might not have their rural train anymore. Where there are rural railways, they actually run pretty well compared to mainland Europe. The bit of our rail network that's rubbish is suburban connectivity. It's that kind of in and around cities, like the equivalent of London Overground, but not in London. Bonnie, you've got the benefit of a fantastic series of suburban transport networks that you can rely on in and around London. Although I did enjoy, and I didn't put it on here because I did enjoy that there's a news story today, Tom Edwards from the BBC, saying that people are moaning about Crossrail, which is quite fun. Did you see that one?
No, I didn't. But what are they moaning about now?
This is funny. So, firstly, they're moaning that it's overcrowded. It's like, oh yeah, new train service. It's popular immediately and it's very busy.
How unreasonable.
They're moaning about the fact that it's been a bit unreliable and they have to wait 10, 15 minutes for a train. These sorts of things. I'm not one to say that we should deny London things to give everywhere else. No, absolutely not. But Crossrail's very good, and I, as John Elledge said, those people should attempt to get between Leeds and Manchester on a Tuesday morning, and they would probably stop complaining about Crossrail, which is pretty brilliant. And also, it's still kind of opening, so it is going to be a little bit bitty because it is sort of still in the process of being finished operationally. But anyway,
I think perhaps a lot of people as well don't appreciate in terms of like the London versus North spend that sort of has become a bit of an issue in terms of, again, I just feel this is a failure of policy and government to highlight the fact that there needs to be a spend everywhere. Then there isn't we're not going to spend money on Northern Transport and the Northern Powerhouse Link because we're going to have to do Crossrail. Crossrail was in the works for a very long time. That's just an excuse. And I just find it I don't know, I'm probably going to sound a bit tin hat. I find it a very good way of dividing people who ultimately want the same thing.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And it came out during Crossrail. So when I think I put this in the new. I think when did I moan about this in a previous news episode? Anyway, there was so like Crossrail is good. London should have Crossrail, just like other cities in the UK should have expanded public transport. Like Crossrail is very good. It's excellent, and riding on it is fun. And it's just you ride in it and you look at the stations like, yeah, this is what public transport should be like. It's brilliant. At the same time, it's very frustrating to see government going, look at Crossrail, isn't it wonderful? How brilliant it is, look at all the benefits it has, whilst also not investing in that sort of system elsewhere. So yeah, it's hugely frustrating.
I mean, I was so frustrated when they shelved Crossrail 2.
Yep.
Given the state of the Northern Line
down in London. The irony is that of the three major transport projects that have been in the works for multiple decades in London, essentially the equivalent of what ended up being the Jubilee Line extension, Crossrail, and Crossrail 2. Crossrail 2 is the one that was the most important to unlocking capacity on the network. Crossrail 2 was actually the one that was more critical and needed to be delivered earliest and had the best benefit-cost ratio. But it just shows that benefit-cost ratios are a political tool and a waste of time because the Jubilee Line extension, which by far had the weakest case, although we wouldn't have it any other way. It's good that it exists. That happened first, of course. So strange old world. But Owen O'Neill points out the fact that Londoners are moaning about it demonstrates perfectly that it's become an accepted part of the fabric of London's public transport. Yeah, pretty quickly. Agreed, Owen. Robin Weston, Crossrail's amazing. I rode it when in London last year. It made me really sad, though, that it wasn't an ongoing rolling plan of amazing cross-city rail links in big cities. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, very frustrating. Anyway, so, what else? Oh, we will have a happy one soon, Bonnie, honestly, but no, for now it's not a happy one. Which is, so we had, everyone remembers, because we did a RailNat on it, we did the Bus Back Better report, which was Boris Johnson's bus report about making buses better, which was actually quite a good report, hence why it got thrown in the bin by Treasury about a year later. And we're talking about bus services needing to improve and all the discussions about levelling up, and yet we've had indeed Louise Haigh here, excellent Shadow Transport Secretary, quoting Grant Shapps in March 2021, our special boy Grant Shapps. Every podcast gets allocated a token Tory. A token Tory MP. So Trash Future have Matt Hancock, and the RailNatter has Grant Shapps. So Grant Shapps in March 2021 will not only stop the decline in bus services, we want to reverse it. The reality is that 1 in 10 bus services have been axed over the last year. That's absolutely bonkers. 1 in 10 is just wild. We talk about multimodality. Buses are an absolutely critical, arguably the most critical element of our. Railways might be the backbone, but buses are the feeder that get most people onto the public transport, into our public transport system and around. And the idea that 1 in 10 local bus services have been axed is, it's just baffling, absolutely baffling.
I think the thing is, with the policies that are coming out and the sort of emotional whiplash from going, we're doing this, we're not doing this, we're doing that, we're doing that. The last couple of years with the government has changed so much in terms of who was actually at the helm. When you mentioned about the report for the buses, it feels like a lot of things like that are getting axed, even though they have very good merit because of the person that wrote them, rather than actually the subject. And I feel like if you and I behave like this in our jobs.
This is why we need transport policy. If transport policy was evidence-based, if it was properly evidence-based and driven by evidence rather than by political whimsy, then it wouldn't matter that you had political cycles, because it would always stay the same, because the evidence is the same and the needs are the same. The challenge is that our policy, the transport policy, is absolutely beholden to political cycles, and it shouldn't be. People might challenge that and say, well, it's not democratic if you pull transport policy out of political cycles and depoliticize it. And I say,
you can't plan transport to change wind directions every 4 years between Tories and Labour. Let's say every 4 years it changes, similar to the American system where it changes every 4 years. Then you have a change in funding every 4 years. It takes longer than every 4 years to nationally plan even just the maintenance, never mind upgrading, never mind increasing capacity, just the maintenance alone. That's, I fully agree with you. It needs to be taken out of the political spectrum.
And and the way that you then, and then the other thing, of course, is you devolve it. You devolve those decisions out so that it's not central government. You devolve it to, and there's been the what is it? The north of England, the Great Northern Council. I don't know what it's called. There was a big meeting today where lots of levelling up stuff was being discussed, and Andy Street and Andy Burnham and all sorts of people were talking about devolution. And as ever, there's lots of talk about real devolution. So that means a funding settlement going to devolved authorities. But until that happens, we're just going to see this continual political pandering. Because actually, when you have the control at a city level or a regional level, those political whimsies don't surface. Generally you'll find that things do actually perpetuate. You end up, because the reality is that the transport needs for a city don't change. It's like, no, we still need all the transport stuff. It doesn't change whether generally it'll be a mayor or the council will change, but it will not. It will continue to deliver that kind of long-term plan of stuff. Lots of chat here. I presume the West of England Combined Authority is what WECA is. WECA has just pulled funding from most of their subsidised services, says SB Trains, Planes and Drives. Cookie Monster. Hello, Cookie Monster. Cookie! We will never get multimodal city journeys if First Bus and First Great Western Rail in Bristol can't sort out a multimodal ticket. Absolutely. Also here, at some points, some routes had only 25% of buses out on the road, which has driven passengers away. Absolutely, yeah. The American system has the advantage that our transportation funding is distributed across federal, state and local governments. The disadvantage is that any of those levels can initiate service cuts. Well, indeed, John Christoph, yeah. So, what's next in our travails? We talk about long-term planning. Well, I spotted this. Mark Theodore Jones here, kind of a geographical and planning expert, has pointed out that a white paper from August 2020 that was supposed to be part of resolving sort of general planning issues and partly helping to tally and tie housing developments into transport. This white paper, it's been in consultation for a while. Government have quietly archived the entire set of files and made it go away. So yet again, another thing to actually think about strategizing for the future and think about tying transport and housing and retail and general urban sprawl and generally tying urban growth and transport together has been not shelved. It would be, at least you could still use it. No, they've archived it and made it go away. Great. Do you remember this thing? Do you remember this coming out?
Who doesn't want to spend their life sat on a train trying to get everywhere they need to be? I don't know about you. I'd love to be on trains for 6 hours a day, going between my job, the doctor's office, maybe my grocery shop. Why not? Let's just all have our time on transport, constantly sat in traffic and on trains and on buses.
I've always said that
because
all
there
trains,
isn't one route.
you could put a Tesco on one. You could have one coach as like a Sainsbury's local. So you get on the train, you get to you pick up your wasabi microwave meal from the Sainsbury's local. You know, I'm all for it. That'd be great. Yes. Oh, so everyone's just pointing out their various regions where local bus subsidies were cut by 100%. Martha Lauren pointing out that Cumbria cut its local bus services subsidies by 100%.
That should be illegal.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like these like the subsidy they give. This is the daft thing about the deregulation of bus services in the UK, is that subsidy goes to a company that makes a profit. You know, that subsidy is going to a company that then makes a profit. So why not just run it in house? Just run bus services in anyway.
I mean, on bus subsidies, just before we move on. So obviously, I was born and raised in London, and then at 15, I moved out to rural Kent. I appreciate it's not a million miles away, but it is if you are a teenager. So yeah. I went from having 2 tube networks in Wembley and 24-hour buses all the time to having 1 bus an hour for 6 hours of the day, and that being it. And because of obviously my working class family situation, everybody around me drove, but I couldn't afford to drive. I couldn't afford to learn. It was not a thing that happened in our house. I was not going to be driving. But then as a result of that, I couldn't get a better job or a proper job when I was at college because I couldn't get home because there was no bus service. So it's again that perpetuating issue, especially, obviously in places like Cumbria where they would not be as fortunate as I was in Kent, where there was obviously a lot more work. If you're in more regional places like Cumbria, where it's a lot more rural, again, it takes people's choices away and further traps people into their financial situation that might not be a good one. And it just irritates me because it feels insidious when they're cutting 100% of services. Again, I know I sound a little bit of tin hat, sort of foil hat person, but I just don't see how it could possibly be accidental when you've got various areas across the UK that don't have a Conservative MP in power that are suffering the most, and we're all expected to go, oh, well, I guess that's just how the cookie crumbles. I guess we'll have to get on with it. I just find it an absolutely disgusting way to govern people.
And invariably, as Owen O'Neill points out, you'll find that the local authorities can't avoid to subsidise any buses, but they can afford to provide free car parking in the town centre, which is essentially a massive subsidy of public space. Absolutely. Oh.
I'd love to know a report that tells us how much.
It'd be good, isn't it? Yeah, how much do they subsidise buses? How much do they subsidise car parking? Yeah, for sure. Right, some happy news. We're going to do happy news for a bit. Because the latest design manual has been published by Anthony Jura and Frank Anatoli and Nick Job, aka Double Arrow, because the new rail symbol is here. The new rail symbol has arrived, which is very exciting. Here it is. You might think, oh, it looks the same as the other one. But no, there are quite a lot of subtle differences to this one. And I am very, very pleased and excited about it. This is something that everyone should be very happy about because this is a very important symbol. It's an iconic symbol, and it's one that has been rather abused for the last 20, 30 years. All the fat ones that we see. There's a fantastic Beauty of Transport blog, actually. In fact, there's 2 things I want to talk about. Firstly, yes, Rail Symbol 2 is here. Fantastic. Nick Job, aka Double Arrow, has done a nice little thread, which I'd recommend going and finding, where he explains the new arrows and explains the logic of it. Things like its aspect ratio has been adjusted from a bonkers 38 to 23 down to 8 to 5, so it's kind of more of a sensible aspect ratio, and little tweaks to the geometry to just make it slightly more geometric for the digital era. But go and find the the Beauty of Transport blog, which is in that thread. Actually, it's in the Twitter thread that's on screen, and I forgot is literally on screen. Go find that thread and you can have a read of it. It's a lovely piece, well worth a read. But that's very exciting, and hopefully we'll get Nick Job on. We'll get Double Arrow on to talk about it because why not? We need some happy stuff to talk about, right? Here's a brief, quick one. I just needed to get some payway on screen, Bonnie. Lewisham's double crossover has been renewed, first time in quite a while. This big, enormous pig of a layout. And also, of course, what makes it even more fun is that it's a third rail layout as well. So not only is it an immensely complicated double crossover, but it's third rail. It's bonkers. But here it is. Here's the view of it from above, in its previous guise. If anyone wants to know what it's like.
I love third rail because it's what I learned first. So I'm like,
ooh.
oh no, I like third rail. It makes sense to my brain. Which people look at me like I'm.
No, it doesn't. It blows holes in you if you touch it, and it floods.
Don't touch it.
And it requires a substation every mile and a half. No, boo to third rail. Also, it's a nightmare for John. Look how many rails are here.
Yeah, it's like learning to drive a car, right? If you learn to drive an automatic first, you're always going to find that easier. So this is what I'd compare to learning on an automatic car first.
Oh, dear me. Yes. So anyway, there we are. Lewisham's double crossover has been renewed. That's it in its old version, everyone, just in case you're wondering. But there it is. Happy days. And you'll like my headline for this one, Bonnie. Brand washing in action. Eurostalis is now official. So Thales and Eurostar... Well, actually, Thales bought Eurostar, I think. I think that's the way around it was. But Thales has a dreadful reputation in Europe. Like, it's a really bad reputation. So the purchase and the fact they're renaming the whole lot Eurostar. Firstly, it kind of makes sense. The Eurostar name is a kind of a cool one. Secondly, it's definitely brand washing because they want to kind of make the Thales bad reputation slightly go away a bit. But so they're using the Thales typeface-ish, and then they've invented a new sort of logo-y thing here. There are, to call it Eurostar. First, Bonnie, what do you think first?
I don't like it.
You don't like it? Yeah. So here's the two side by side. There's a Thales and a Eurostar next to each other.
I mean, I don't like change anyway, but also, was it really needed? You know, like given that Eurostar are having problems in terms of, carrying almost a third fewer passengers, which came out on the BBC at time of recording 18 hours ago, in terms of carrying, 30% fewer passengers due to bottlenecks in stations. Was this really the problem to focus on? As a fee-paying passenger, I look at this and think, okay, why are you wasting time with a rebrand when you're having severe operational problems, meaning that a third of your passengers are not on their seats when your train departs?
Yeah.
That for me, that makes me think I do not trust what is going on within the organisation to properly prioritise operational issues.
Yeah, as a few people, Richard Smith, regular visitor to the show, Richard Smith pointed out, overall it's an improvement on the current design. The star logo is good, but text is bad, and I'm worried about their wider plans. So Richard Smith likes the logo, but is worried about the wider Thales / Eurostar or Eurostalis plans. Agreed.
I'm probably being unfair. I mean, the logo's fine. It's just that overshadowing the fact that on like the same day it's coming out about the third of the passengers, it just makes me not even really care about the rebranding.
Yeah, there are serious problems on both of these services at the moment. Serious problems. The star logo looks like the Church of England logo, says Gareth. Gregor McCabery is asking, what is that sticking out bit on the Eurostar? Oh, that sticks out. That's the front of the coupler. So when the shell opens, say again.
It's called a left phalange.
Oh, crikey!
No, both. It's a reference from Friends. It's not called a left phalange. Friends.
Yeah, the technical element of that, it's a left phalange. No, it's a bit that hooks into the coupler. I think it's Delner, isn't it? Wait a minute. What coupler do IETs have? IET coupler. I've been through this journey before. Class 800 coupler. Wait a minute. I'm googling on the fly. Delner. Yeah, it's a Delner. So that's a Delner coupler, and the little loop at the front enables the connection. People are going to correct me and say it's not a Delner coupler now. You watch. The Volaro is looking a bit haggard. I love the fact they picked a train which has got like a mucky roof. It's got like they've clearly had to, like something's walloped it, and they've looked like they've had to do some additional work, some sanding work on the corner. Yeah, it's looking a bit haggard given that it's a fairly new train.
They're setting expectations low now.
I know. I have other. So I don't mind. I mean, yes, the logo looks a bit like a cat's anus, but I don't mind. I don't necessarily hate it. I presume it's because the board of Thales are interested in expanding a caliphate of some kind, because it does look very much like the Turkish flag. I don't know why. It just reminds me a lot of the Turkish flag. It's just nah. I think it's whatever. I think they're bigger problems afoot. I think it makes sense to merge them under one name. Eurostar makes sense as the name. Thales doesn't really mean anything to anyone. But yeah, there are bigger problems. Some people are saying, okay, Eurostar are they're going to unban bicycles. That would be good. But I think there are bigger issues with the way these trains operate. Anyway, there we are. Shout out to Turkey. Boo Erdogan. Right, so. Oh. Right, we're nearly at the end. Don't worry. We're nearly at the end, Bonnie. So
having a good time.
This is an interesting one. Again, I like to pick up bits of transport policy or transport research that are kind of interesting. Lots of people who don't like low traffic neighborhoods moan that it pushes traffic onto boundary roads, and a study has found that is not true, because what actually happens, and this is a concept that's well understood, is that if you make it more unpleasant to, if you generally kind of dissuade drivers from driving, those cars disappear. They don't move elsewhere. They just disappear. It's called traffic evaporation, and it's a thing that we've understood for quite a long time. It's essentially the opposite of induced demand. If you make driving less pleasant, it's not just that cars will do it to pick a different route. They'll disappear. They just won't exist. People will cease to drive. Overall, they will find a different way to travel. So, particularly in London, where you have lots of viable alternatives. So, yeah, it's an interesting bit of research. Go and find it. Rachel Aldred and the team have done this research. Damn, Rachel Aldred. Bonnie, it's your turn to research. It's your turn to Google people again and tell me who they work for. And I'll just do it here. Rachel Aldred. There we go. British researcher, Professor of Transport at the University of Westminster, and Director of the Active Travel Academy. There you are. Shout out to Rachel Aldred. Who is on Twitter. You can follow Rachel. Block vehicular access, cars disappear, which is good news. Right. So, this is a nice one. This is some very good news, which is that the Merseyrail 777s are here. Hooray! With all of the good things about them, like mostly level boarding, also that they're new and they've replaced what were some of the oldest trains running on the British rail network. They are finally here. The arrangement has been made that they can now be running, and they are brilliant trains, absolutely brilliant trains. I like
how accessible they looked just there. So,
yes.
See on the right hand side when the door opens. Obviously, you've got the second part coming out, so there's not much.
There's a gap filler.
People who use wheelchairs and walkers and things like that.
These trains. So exactly. So I did a bit of a review of these trains. When did I do a review of these trains? Actually, it was in the episode. It was not in episode 31. It was in a Rail Live episode, not the last Rail Live episode, but the one before, where I had a go on the 777s, and it was good fun. But if you want to understand why the introduction of the 777 is really important, go back and watch episode 31 on level boarding, because these trains are really important. The Greater Anglia Stadlers have the same kind of low floor, but they have not been introduced as part of a systemic approach to delivering level boarding. They've just been delivered on a network where some of the platforms are compliant height, but lots aren't. So this episode is one to go and understand why the introduction of the 777s is so important, because there was a rolling program of correcting the platform offsets. And by the way, to those there's someone who's been watching through all the rail natters and giving very long comments under each of them. I appreciate the effort. To you who's watching that, if you're watching this one, if you're also watching the latest ones, in answer to the question of can you not correct the track more cheaply than correcting the platform? When I say correcting platform offsets, I just mean correcting the distance between the rails and the platform edge. That might be adjusting the track. It might be adjusting the platform. It could be either. Anyway, so that's what was done on Merseyrail. So that's very exciting. Seeing this, as you say, level boarding trains. They've got loads of space for all sorts of stuff. They've got buggy areas. They've got really good wheelchair accessibility. They're just nice. These are all the kind of videos that Merseyrail were excitedly posting on the day. The one that gave me the feels was actually fun enough. The one with the family who've managed to get their buggy onto the train easily because they didn't have to lift it up a 300mm pole vault gap. Anyway, so that's good news. On the flip side of that, I spotted this at the end of last year, or maybe it was at the start of this year actually, which is there's a disability or an accessibility campaign group in Seoul who've essentially been banned from travelling by train and kind of as part of a pretty major protest. What
were the reasons they were given that they were banned.
Oh, they were doing a protest.
I mean, there's always like a fluffy PR reason, right?
Well, everyone has to remember that South Korea is actually pretty authoritarian as a country. We kind of forget because we assume it's westernized and that it's not authoritarian, but actually South Korea is a pretty authoritarian state. And these people were protesting a lack of investment in accessibility on public transport, and we're kind of doing protests by going on and off trains and pointing out, and blocking a train where they didn't have access, and this annoyed government and some commuters, and so they got the police in to just stop them, and have said that they'll fine them 5 million South Korean cash if they continue to do this. Which, to be fair, would happen in the UK as well if the Campaign for Level Boarding decided to do hard protesting. We'd also end up with a banning order and probably a big fine, because the UK is also quite authoritarian. So people are still fighting. In terms of places across the world where this is still a challenge, it's a challenge in lots of places, and people know it's a challenge. So the solutions are good.
Yeah, but that fine works out over $3,000 per person per fine. If it's a 5 million South Korean exchange rate in terms of the exchange rate to the UK, that's still just over £3,000 for someone who lives a disabled life in South Korea, which is not really a proportional fine, is it? Let's be honest.
No, it's not. It absolutely is not. No.
Again, it pushes people who already, again, I'm going to assume, who already, have problems in terms of their finances due to the fact that they are disabled in a non-disabled catering society. Money, I'm going to assume, is probably tight, and therefore it's a fine that people cannot afford. Which really, if it's a fine that only impacts people who are poor, it's not really a fine, is it? It's a tax.
Yeah. As people pointing out, yes, no, I know South Korea is not the most authoritarian part of the Korean Peninsula. Yes, thanks for yes, but and someone else pointing out, not to get tanky or anything, but why would being westernized ever make it not authoritarian? Good point. Yes. Anyway, so let's end on a happy note, which is that more of those lovely Stadlers are inbound, because the Tyne and Wear Metro is seeing its new train fleet arrive in the not too distant future. Gosforth Depot being kind of ongoing construction there. My colleagues are kind of in the process of designing, finalising the stage design for that. It's been a very complicated design, but it's been a fun one. Here's one of those nice trains sat next to a fun overhead electrified rack rail train, which is quite fun. I just like this picture. I think it's a nice picture. These two little happy trains next to each other having fun. So I'm excited to see more of the Stadler Metro type fleet. These Stadler Suburban trains rolling out, which will be great because they're great little trains. So there is, to answer your question, Bonnie. Yes, we're communicating by mess. I'm not coping very well with multitasking here, but
I'm so guilty of doing that. Just WhatsApping people whilst they're presenting and being like, "Why can't you do more things at once?" No. Tim Ballum is pointing out in relation to this. Tim, I'll just point out, if the new law passes, that they would get tagged for just talking about these protests on social media. Yikes. Yes. Adam Ems is saying westernized generally implies liberal democracy, but SK, South Korea, is owned by a small group of huge companies. Yeah, well, quite. To be fair, so is the US, and arguably you'd say the UK is as well. In the UK, it's the big four. Anyway, right. AOB, I'm not... Bonnie, we can discuss... Let's go big face and discuss... Oh, you're just going to see my fevered head. My shiny, fevered head. There was some other news that you spotted that actually was in today. What's happened in Germany? Tell us about what's happened in Germany. So this broke at 4:30, today's date, the 25th of January, if you're listening back on future podcasts. So unfortunately, 2 people have died after a passenger has gone on a knife attack on a train in Germany. So this train was from Kiel to Hamburg and was 3 p.m. local time, obviously in Germany. Unfortunately, 2 people have died and around 10 people have been seriously injured in that attack. Now, obviously, that's extremely upsetting. That's the news as of right now. Obviously, that story could change and evolve. But I do think there is a point to discuss in terms of security at major stations. And is there an argument for higher security levels at major stations when people get on and off of trains?
Yeah, I mean, my argument would
just
always
there is a
be,
personal.
yeah, no, go on.
There is a personal element to this for me. So obviously we all remember the various terrorist attacks happened across London. Unfortunately, I was in the London Bridge, London Borough terrorist attack in London Bridge station coming out when it happened. So for me, this is something where that's why it came up on my phone, because I have it set to my news feed and things like that to tell me. Otherwise, very helpful people go, "Did you hear about this?" in a panic, which is not good for my brain. But you know, for me, I'm very curious what other people's opinions are, because I appreciate that I probably have a very skewed view of, well, if we're just super secure, nothing can ever go wrong. But actually, that's not necessarily a balanced view. So I'm really curious what your view is on that, Gareth, and also you all, dear listeners.
Yeah, for me, I think that one of the challenges on, well, when it comes to security, the thing that often a more equal society, a healthier society, is one that invariably has less of this sort of thing happening. So the key thing is make people less desperate by not screwing them over, by not reducing their universal credit, by not generally just making more people exist in society who are really desperate. That doesn't solve the problem, of course, but it massively reduces the chances that a bad event can happen. But I think one of the ways that you can kind of manage some of this stuff is firstly by people feeling. I mean, it's really one of the, and this comes to kind of a much broader picture of people feeling safe and secure on trains generally, and particularly women feeling safe and secure on trains actually, and staff presence is certainly an important thing, an important part of it. I think having staff presence on trains, so there's someone that people can go and speak to. I think that's really important, particularly for long distance trains, regional trains. But it's difficult because I think the last thing we want to do is introduce more rigorous security. The security that's on Eurostar. We were moaning about Eurostar earlier. There is no reason for Eurostar to have any of the security that it has on board, because you can drive onto the shuttle trains with your car and there's no security whatsoever for that on that process. And in a way, that's quite off-putting. The fact that you're in a queue for an hour before you get on your train is quite off-putting. We want to make trains more off-putting. We want as many people as possible to travel by train. So yeah, I think in terms of managing security, I think ensuring that people are looking out for things that don't look right. Keep an eye on someone. It's a tricky one, because I don't think the answer is more British Transport Police hanging around. I always feel uncomfortable when you see the British Transport Police hanging around with guns at big stations. I'm not sure. Yeah. And Wayne Couzens didn't have a gun, and who was BTP, and he didn't have a gun and did kind of run in and tackle the terrorist. That was the London Bridge. It was Wayne Couzens for the London Bridge attack, wasn't it? If I remembered that right, was that right?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
So it's a very difficult one. I don't exactly.
There is a multi-element to it, though, in terms of, our CCTV across the network is not as good as it could be. In order to seek prosecution when people are detained by members of the public because there aren't, for example, there's no conductor on board and somebody's been assaulted. Oh, the CCTV either, was deleted or was not good enough of quality. And I just think things like that are just not remotely acceptable. I mean, when I was doing research for Euston Station upgrade, I was looking into backwards motion detection, where, let's say, Gareth, you had decided to steal a dairy milk from the WH Smiths, and we caught you on your way out of the station. So I could click on your face, and there is a program that you can use to backwards detect where you've been through the whole station in order to trace your movements if you've committed any other crime. And I think things like that, as long as they're being done responsibly, because obviously we don't want to get to the point where we're then over tracking people in terms of their whereabouts either. There is a balance. But at the moment, I don't feel safe on our public transport, not just as a woman, not just late at night, but in general. I do think there is a balance to be struck that I don't think we're striking at the moment in terms of the amount of sniffer dogs, for example, for County Lines drug running. There should be a lot more, in my opinion. Not only as a passenger do I feel really happy seeing BTP with a drugs dog walking through the station, walking through a train, going, oh, brilliant. It just makes me feel safer. But also it gives that external look for people who are doing organised crime that there is a stronger presence there than they necessarily thought. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I was just curious.
Yeah, So there's a few things. Firstly, it's not. I want to catch this. Not Wayne Couzens. I'm remembering the wrong Wayne. Do not. He is a bad person within the Metropolitan Police.
Oh God, he's the other one.
Yes, he's the one who murdered Sarah Everard.
Oh no.
I'm trying to find the name of the police officer who I'm actually referring to, because I met him. He's lovely. But I want to get his name right now before I awards. 2020 British Transport Police. I'm just doing, this is an on the fly. Here we are. There we go. There we are. It'd be good if I was more organised at doing kind of planning these things. Let me just find. It's amazing how much it's been difficult for me to find. Anyway, right. I can't find. Someone in the chat can drop me who the name is. Someone in the chat.
Was it Charlie Guggenhout?
No. Someone go at Richard Smith. Go Google and find out who the BTP guy I'm talking about, who kind of tackled someone who was running around with a big knife. It could be who. No, no. I don't think it is. It could be that guy. It's not that guy who I met. Oh, wait a minute. I've broken Skype. Wait a minute. Let me go.
That might be my fault. Apologies.
No, it's all right. I Everyone, it's fine. Everything's going well. Wait, where's your... Yeah, Bonnie, you've switched your camera off, I think. Possibly.
Nope, quite. My camera's still on.
Oh, how strange.
I'll turn it off and on again.
Yeah, turn it off and on again. That's a good way to fix it. How odd. We've lost Bonnie's face, everyone. Wayne Marquez. Thanks, Richard. I was getting my Wayne's. Thank you. Technical difficulties. I'm not going to press the technical difficulties button. No, I'm not going to do that. It's fine. We've lost Bonnie's face for some reason. Skype is in a minute. No, it's me. I did it. It was because I tried to open the link. It was me. I've fixed it now. We're good.
It's me sending you links through Skype chat. And
Don't send links through Skype chat, Bonnie. It breaks everything. Thanks, everyone. Wayne Marquez. Yeah, there we go. So, right. Anyway, let's get our two big faces up, because I wanted to actually make a serious point, which is the challenge, of course, with more security, with more, it's CCTV, whether it's more police, is that whilst that might feel safer to, certainly, it's a good example, is the Metropolitan Police in London right now. More police doesn't necessarily mean safer for everyone. And actually, a lot of parts of society feel a lot less safe when you have more police around. So more staff, potentially a good thing. More station staff, good thing. More station staff around big stations, for sure. So reducing staff on stations, bad. More staff on stations, good. More police,
even stations that are further out. Even stations that are further out, I don't think should be unmanned. Because
we don't want unstaffed
everybody
stations.
Knows are unmanned. So it's the perfect place to go and human traffic somebody at a station that is unmanned, where there's an unreliable service, where people will be stuck on a platform alone with nothing around them for miles. And because they don't have any other forms of transport and there's no bus for them to get, they are stranded.
Absolutely. Yeah, John Christoph, you're absolutely right. I agree on... and you see this in the US, is that invariably, and it's not quite... Well, I mean, it's not as extreme in the UK, but invariably along similar lines, is that the challenge with more surveillance is... who is it impacting on? In the US, it's black people pretty much heavily, and in London, similar. But so I think it's about staffing, not more security, not more security theatre necessarily, but more staff. Having it, because it's also it's a win-win, right? You've staff who can be helpful. These staff can be helpful if you've got a need to, you want to ask a question about how you get somewhere, or you just want someone to have a chat to. Then it's good to have more staff around. So just have more staff on stations. That feels like a good step in the right direction. And of course, obviously in the UK, we're currently doing the opposite of that right now. So good, marvelous. Anyway, right. Bonnie, we went on by 18 minutes. Whoops. I thought it was going to be a short one.
That's pretty good for us, though.
I got excited. I know we've done better than normal, but anyway, right. Okay, so, as ever, everyone on audio only, thanks so much for listening. Everyone in the chat, thank you. As you can, this has been a bit of a. Bonnie has kept me going in an episode where my brain is completely fried, and this whole episode I've just had beads of sweat pouring down my head. So sorry for everyone who's watched this on YouTube and had to experience that, because I think I'm going through another fever right now, which is not good. I'm going to drink a huge amount of water and collapse face first into bed. Patreon.com/GarethDennis to pay for my paracetamol. PayPal.me/GarethDennis to also pay for my paracetamol. And GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord to recommend that I take some paracetamol. Yes, to all of you. Thanks to all those who support and to those who continue in the chat. Next week, it's a fairly quick and easy episode, actually. It's going to be a page turn, but we're going to talk about modal shift. We're actually going to talk about it's a Green Gauge 21 paper that was done for the High Speed Rail group, but it talks about modal shift, and there's some quite interesting stuff in there that I think would be worth us picking out, because when I talk about modal shift and release capacity in HS2, so how does that work? So I figured it's a thing that we can sort of have a look at. On that note, I'm going to go back to Bonnie and say, Bonnie, thank you so much. Thanks so much for keeping me afloat on an episode where I might otherwise have just collapsed.
No, thank you for having me. It's always fun to come on and do the rail natters. I do enjoy it. So thanks.
Yeah, well, we'll have to have you on again for some more plans afoot, and watch this space, everyone. That's all I'm saying. So, Bonnie. Everyone here, Jack Elliott's asking if this episode is available intravenously. Not yet. We don't have the technology yet, but we could attempt it.
Okay, we're going to write a policy where everyone's going to get the podcast intravenously, even though the technology doesn't work yet. It's fine.
Exactly. We're going to write that policy based on magical intravenous podcasting.
It'll work really well.
Yeah, that's it. That's a nice. And on that wonderful loop in, tying us back to the start of things. I'm going to let Bonnie go. I'm going to go. And we'll see you all next time. Cheerio, everyone.
Thanks,
Cheerio.
everyone. Bye. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.